You know how people say, when you buy a home, you're buying peace of mind? Well, I believed that. When I first moved into my house, I thought I had finally found the kind of life I had been working for all these years. I'm not rich by any means, but I saved, I hustled, and I wanted a place where I could breathe without neighbors breathing down my neck. The property I bought wasn't flashy. It wasn't some mansion with a pool or a luxury estate. But it had one thing that mattered more to me than anything: privacy. My house sat back from the main neighborhood, separated by a narrow road that most people ignored. The best part? It came with a sturdy, beautiful gate at the entrance. That gate was more than metal bars and hinges to me. It was a wall between my peace and the chaos of the outside world. I loved locking it behind me. Every time I heard the click of that lock, I felt safe, protected, free. But here's the thing about peace. You don't realize how fragile it is until someone decides they don't like you having it. That someone, in my case, was my HOA. The first time I even heard from the HOA, it was a letter slipped into my mailbox. I remember standing there on a sunny Saturday morning, coffee in one hand, this envelope in the other. The letterhead was fancy. Neighborhood Homeowners Association, with a long list of rules. And right there in bold, underlined like it was some kind of crime, was this line: all gates must remain unlocked during daylight hours. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Who in their right mind thinks they can tell me whether my gate is locked or not? It was my property. My road, my gate. At first I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they sent it to the wrong house. But then I kept reading and I realized they weren't asking. They were ordering me. That was my first taste of what was coming. Now, before you think I'm anti-community or something, let me say this. I don't mind rules when they make sense. Sure, keep your lawn trimmed, don't let trash pile up, fine. But telling me whether I can lock my own gate? That wasn't about community. That was about control. I crumpled that letter up and tossed it in the trash. Problem solved, right? Wrong. 2 days later, a woman from the HOA knocked on my door. She introduced herself as Karen, and yes, the universe gave me the gift of an HOA president actually named Karen. She smiled that tight, polite smile that never reaches the eyes. You know the kind. And she said in this sweet but deadly tone, "Hi there. I think you received our notice about the gate. We're going to need you to keep it unlocked during the day. It's community policy." I told her calmly, "It's my gate. On my property. I'll lock it if I want to." Her smile didn't even twitch, but I could see her jaw tighten. "That gate," she said, "blocks access to the shared road. It must remain open for everyone." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "That road isn't shared. It came with the house. It's mine." She didn't like that answer. Not one bit. She handed me another copy of the rules, told me I'd be fined if I didn't comply, and left with a fake cheerful wave. I stood there watching her leave, and for the first time since buying my home, I felt the peace slipping. That night, sitting on my porch with a beer in my hand, I kept staring at the locked gate. I thought about all the years I worked for this place, all the dreams I had about minding my own business, enjoying my space, and finally having control of my own life. And now some HOA people I didn't even know wanted to rip that control away from me. It wasn't happening. That was the night I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to keep that gate locked. I was going to make sure they regretted ever telling me to open it. What would you do if your HOA told you to unlock your own gate? Would you fight back or just give in to avoid trouble? Stick around, because this fight only gets bigger, nastier, and way more satisfying. You ever notice how small problems don't stay small? When other people make it their personal mission to blow them up? That's exactly what happened with this gate situation. At first, I thought maybe the HOA would bark a little and then move on to someone else. You know, pick on the guy with the trash cans out too long, or the neighbor who doesn't mow his lawn straight lines. But no, they had their eyes locked on me and my gate. The fines started coming. Every week, like clockwork, I'd get a new envelope in the mail. First, it was $50. The next one was $100. Then it jumped to $250, all for non-compliance with community rules. Let me make this crystal clear. The road behind that gate was not their property. It was mine. I had the paperwork, the deed, the title, all with my name on it. But the HOA didn't care about facts. They cared about control. And the more I ignored them, the more desperate they became. One morning I came out to grab my paper, and I noticed 3 neighbors standing by my gate. They weren't trespassing, at least not yet, but they were close enough to make it. Obvious they were talking about me. The second they saw me, they got real quiet. One of them even muttered, "He's the guy making everything harder for everyone." I wanted to laugh. Making things harder? I wasn't the one sending letters and fines. I was just living my life. But it hit me then. HOA wasn't just coming after me with fines. They were turning the neighbors against me. Classic move. Divide and conquer. The next visit from Karen made that even clearer. She didn't bother with fake smiles this time. She stood at my door with a clipboard in her hand and said, "If you don't comply, we'll take further action. This community depends on cooperation. You're setting a bad example." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and asked, "Bad example for who? The people who don't even own this road? Or the people who think they own me?" Her face went red. She tried to talk over me, saying something about rules exist for everyone and shared responsibility. But I cut her off. "Karen, listen. This is not your road. This is not your gate. And the next time you show up here trying to push me around, you better bring a lawyer because I'm done with your warnings." I shut the door in her face before she could respond. Now here's the thing about me. I don't like fights. I really don't. I'd rather grill on my back porch, watch the game, and enjoy my space in peace. But when someone keeps poking, when they don't take the hint, that's when the stubborn side of me comes out. And oh boy, was it coming out now. The more they pushed, the more determined I became to hold my ground. That gate wasn't just a gate anymore. It was a line in the sand. But the HOA wasn't finished, not by a long shot. One evening, I came home from work and found a big yellow notice taped to my gate. It read, "Final warning. Failure to unlock this gate will result in legal action by the HOA." I stood there, reading it under the glow of my headlights, and for the first time, I didn't feel annoyed. I felt challenged. They wanted a war? Fine. But they forgot one very important detail. When you poke at someone long enough, eventually they start looking for ways to poke back. And trust me, I was already cooking up a plan that would make their precious little rules crumble like dust. If your HOA kept slapping you with fines and threats over something that wasn't even theirs, would you fight back? Or just cave in? Drop your thoughts below, because the next move I made changed the game forever. You ever get that feeling when a situation stops being annoying and starts feeling personal? That's what hit me like a freight train in week 3. At first, the HOA's actions felt like noise, letters, lectures, a passive-aggressive call now and then. But when they started making my day-to-day life harder, that's when it stopped being a policy fight and became harassment. And let me tell you, harassment changes how a person thinks. It started small and stupid. Flyers shoved under my door at 6 a.m. Community safety notice in all caps. With a grainy photo of my locked gate. Someone had gone so far as to circle my gate in red marker like it was a crime scene. I found one tacked to my mailbox, another on my neighbor's car. Whoever was putting them up wanted everyone to know I was the problem. Then the towing notice came. One Tuesday morning, I walked out to my truck and found a laminated warning stuck to the windshield. Vehicles parked behind locked gates without HOA approval are subject to tow. I parked legally. I had a title, but the note implied I was breaking rules. And in my neighborhood, perception often becomes reality. Neighbors stopped being friendly. People I'd waved to for years suddenly gave me the cold shoulder. At the grocery store, someone whispered, "He thinks he owns the whole road." I felt like a villain in a movie I never auditioned for. And then the HOA took it up a notch. Surveillance. Security cameras started appearing on utility poles around the entrance to my property. At first I thought it was random, maybe the city, but the cameras were pointed directly at my gate. They had timestamps, zoomed-in angles, and the kind of sterile, documentary focus that makes you feel watched even when you're alone in your kitchen. I felt stupid locking the door at night knowing that those little black eyes were watching every click of the latch. One afternoon, I caught 2 HOA board members walking the perimeter like they were military scouts. They were chatting, pointing, taking notes on their phones. Karen waved at them like they were on a picnic. It was a show of force. The message was clear. We can make your life miserable, and we will. With the cameras and the flyers and the towing threats, the fines tripled. Each envelope shredded a little more of my patience. I started losing sleep over stupid things, what the next notice would say, whether someone would actually try to tow a visitor's car, if my mail would be tampered with next. It felt petty and vindictive. And the worst part? It was working. Emotionally, they were getting under my skin. My friends said, just open the gate. Pay the fines. Move on. That would have been the rational, boring route. But it never felt like that was the issue. This wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about property rights, about not letting a committee of busybodies define the terms of my life. So I started documenting everything. I filed every piece of mail, took photos of flyers, recorded the license plates of cars that loitered outside my property at odd hours. I started keeping a journal, not a dramatic one, but a ledger of events with dates and times. If they were going to treat me like a problem, I was going to treat them like a case. Then one night, my gate lock was found smeared with glue. Whoever did it didn't do a perfect job. I got it cleaned, but it was the first time someone had crossed a line from passive-aggressive to outright malicious. A neighbor complained of a rock thrown at their window the same week. Coincidence? Maybe. But when you look back after the fact, patterns emerge. I called the HOA and accused them of turning neighbors against me. They denied it, of course, with the practiced sincerity of people who've rehearsed their denials. We encourage civil discourse, Karen intoned. We don't condone vandalism, sure. We were past letters now. This was psychological warfare. I started to dread walking to my mailbox. I started checking my cameras at midnight, the paranoid ritual of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. One afternoon, the HOA president sent a certified letter demanding I appear at a board meeting to explain my continued non-compliance. The meeting was public. They were going to embarrass me in front of the community. I thought about not going. I even dreamt of burning the whole place down and moving to a cabin in Montana. But then I remembered my ledger, my photos, the glue on the lock, and the records of the surveillance cameras. If this was going to be a fight, I wanted facts, not fury. So I prepared. I printed copies of my deed, circled the legal descriptions, highlighted lines that said the road was private. I outlined the sequence of harassment, attached photos, and prepared to speak in an almost boringly methodical way. If they wanted a spectacle, I'd give them a TED Talk on why they were wrong. If they wanted to bring lawyers and cameras, I wanted them to beat back a stack of documentation. When I walked into that meeting, the room smelled like cheap coffee and authority. People stared like I had grand larceny on my resume. Karen opened with a speech about community cohesion, and a chorus of nods echoed through the room. Then they played video, clips from the cameras positioned outside my gate. Time-lapse footage sped up to look like suspicious loitering. They framed my locking and unlocking as problematic behavior. It was theater. When my turn came, I walked up, calm as I could be. I handed out copies of the deed. I pointed to language that explicitly stated access easement details and ownership. I explained the glue incident. I read dates from my journal. I showed the photos of flyers and the towing note. I didn't shout. I didn't get dramatic. I just spoke like someone reading a report that disproved a lie. A few people in the room looked uncomfortable. Karen's smile thinned. But the crowd reaction is what got me. A few neighbors applauded me for standing up, while others muttered that I was making a scene. The HOA voted, predictably, to keep enforcing the rule and to pursue further remedies. I left knowing two things. One, they weren't going to stop. And two, I wasn't going to let them win by default. That night, I sat on my couch and stared at the gate through the window. The presence of all that petty, organized opposition was suffocating. The natural response would have been to back down. But something else had already crept in. A slow, cold resolve. When people attack your home, you either crumble or you strategize. I was done being reactive. So I started to plan. Not with violence, not with revenge porn or petty vandalism. I started to think legally, financially, creatively. If they wanted control, maybe control was a thing I could buy back, in a way they wouldn't expect. And once that thought was planted, it wouldn't leave me alone. Have you ever been targeted by a neighborhood committee or small power group? What did you do? Fold, fight, or file? Tell me below. The next part gets into the spark that changed this from fury into a full plan, and trust me, it's not what you're picturing. Every fight has that one moment where you stop playing defense and decide it's time to swing back. For me, that moment came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I'd just gotten home from work, soaked from running between my truck and the front porch. I shook off the water, grabbed the mail, and there it was, another thick envelope from the HOA, but this one wasn't like the others. This one was different. Inside was a formal notice of legal intent. They were threatening to sue me. I read the letter 3 times, standing in the hallway with my boots still dripping mud on the floor. They claimed that by keeping my gate locked, I was restricting community access to shared property. They said I was causing harm to residents and violating the spirit of cooperative living. And here's the kicker. They said they were prepared to pursue damages if I didn't comply. Damages for locking my own damn gate. I don't know if it was the rain, the exhaustion, or just the buildup of weeks of harassment, but I snapped. Not in a yelling, throwing things kind of way. No, this was quieter, colder. The kind of snapping where the anger stops, burning hot and turns into something razor sharp. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me, and I whispered out loud, "They want to play games? Fine, let's play." See, I'd been thinking about that road for weeks. Every fine, every flyer, every dirty look from a neighbor made me more certain that the road was the key. It wasn't just dirt and gravel to me, it was leverage. I remembered my realtor mentioning almost in passing that the road technically came with the property. At the time, I brushed it off as legal fluff. But now, that detail was glowing neon in my brain. So I pulled out my deed again. I read the language carefully. Then I called the county clerk's office and asked for clarification. A patient woman on the other end confirmed it. The road was mine, all mine. No shared ownership, no easement for the HOA, just private property. And in that moment, I realized something huge. If I owned the road, then technically, everyone else in the neighborhood was using it at my discretion. The next HOA meeting was a week later. Against my better judgment, I showed up, not to argue this time, just to watch. They were sitting there, smug in their chairs, going over community landscaping and trash pickup schedules, like they were running a Fortune 500 company. I kept quiet, but my mind was spinning. I looked around the room at the faces of the people who had whispered about me, voted against me, sided with Karen, all while driving over my road every single day to get to their precious homes. And I thought, what if I flipped the script? What if instead of them controlling me, I controlled them? The idea started out as a joke in my head, a fantasy. But as the meeting dragged on, the fantasy grew sharper, more possible. I didn't need to argue about the gate anymore. I didn't need to fight about fines. I didn't even need to complain. All I needed to do was use the one card they didn't even realize I was holding. Because here's the truth. They could threaten me, fine me, and gossip about me all day long. But at the end of the day, they couldn't even get to their own houses without driving over my property. And once I realized that, the power shifted. That night, back at my kitchen table, I pulled out a notebook and started writing. Not a rant, not a complaint, a plan. Step 1, verify ownership beyond all doubt. Step 2, explore what control of the road legally meant. Step 3, figure out if I could restrict access, or better yet, charge for it. Step 4, decide how to drop the hammer without it backfiring. I wasn't thinking small anymore. I wasn't just planning to keep the gate locked. I was planning to lock them out of their own convenience. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm, clear, in control. The HOA thought they were tightening the noose around me, but really, they'd pushed me straight into discovering the one weakness they never saw coming. And let me tell you, once that switch flipped, there was no going back. This wasn't their game anymore. It was mine. If you had the power to shut down the very road your HOA depended on, would you use it or keep it as quiet leverage? Comment what you do, because in the next part, I'll show you how I turned that wild idea into an ironclad plan. Part 5, the plan. If you've ever been backed into a corner, you know there's a strange clarity that comes with it. The noise drops away. You can finally hear the one smart thing your gut's been whispering beneath all the outrage. That's where I was when the plan moved from late-night fantasy to a checklist on a legal pad. I started by doing the boring, adult stuff. Calling people who actually know how property works. Not drama-filled neighbors or smug HOA presidents, but the county clerk, a title company, and a real estate attorney. I found online with decent reviews and zero patience for nonsense. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was looking for facts. Fact number 1, the road was in my name on the deed. Fact number 2. There were no recorded easements granting the HOA explicit rights to control access. Fact number 3. There was, however, a small sliver of ambiguity in the county. Records. A strip of land adjacent to the road, registered under the name of an estate company that hadn't been active in years. In plain English, somebody else might own a piece of the puzzle. And if that piece moved, everything could change. That ambiguity was the doorway. If the HOA thought they could bully me by pretending the road was communal, I could respond by removing the community's ability to take that road for granted. If I could consolidate control legally, then their threats would be empty words. I didn't have to be mean. I just had to be smarter. Step 1 was secrecy. I didn't broadcast my curiosity to the neighborhood. If Karen even sniffed that I was moving, she'd call a meeting, start petitions, and paint me as the villain again. So I created a little legal armor. A limited liability company, LLC, with a neutral name, Cedar Lane Holdings. It sounded innocuous, like a small investor, not a vindicated homeowner. The LLC gave me a way to act in the marketplace without dragging my name through the mud. I set up the LLC, got an EIN, and opened a bank account. Then I called the title company and asked them to run a deep search on that sliver of land. The kind of search that pulls up probate records, old tax sales, liens, basically everything the HOA would rather not reveal. The more boring paper I shredded with my eyes, the more excited I got. And then they found it. Turns out the estate company that technically owned the strip had dissolved after the owner died 10 years earlier. The county had a recorded notice that they were purging stale properties if nobody claimed them. Even better, the county sometimes auctions off abandoned parcels or offers them to interested buyers. In other words, the road's ownership picture was more malleable than I'd hoped. This was no longer a fight about shouting at meetings. This was a quiet, legal maneuver. It was a chess move. Next came the money conversation. I'm not rich, not by a long shot, but I had savings, a good credit score, and a willingness to risk a chunk of cash to protect my peace. I talked to my bank about a short-term loan, figured out how much the county would want at auction, and set a strict cap for myself. It's amazing how clarity about numbers turns fury into strategy. I also hired my attorney to draft an offer that would be ironclad, no loopholes, for the HOA to exploit. We set contingencies, assigned the property to the LLC, and set the closing timeline to be as fast as the county would allow. Everything had to be tight and discreet. On the morning of the auction, I felt like a spy in my own life. I drove to the courthouse in a beat-up car. The LLC paperwork folded in my pocket like a secret map. The room smelled like coffee and old carpet. Lawyers and real estate folk traded small talk while clerks shuffled papers. I kept my head down, watched the items roll by on the clerk's screen, and when the parcel that touched my road appeared, my heart jumped. I bid. Not loud, just decisive. The price climbed, faster than I expected. Turns out other small-time investors sniffed opportunity too, but I stuck to my cap. When the hammer came down, I'd won. The clerk called my LLC name, and for a dizzy moment, the world narrowed to a set of numbers and a deed stamp. Signing those closing documents felt surreal. My name wasn't on the headline of the deed. Cedar Lane Holdings was. On paper, it was standard, transfer of title. Payment processed, new parcel number assigned. But privately, I felt the weight of a boundary actually changing. I had turned a rumor into an immutable legal fact. The strip of land connecting to my road was now under my control. Walking back to my truck, deed in a legal folder. I felt a rush that wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming agency. People had tried to make me small. They'd sent letters, posted flyers, leaned on neighbors. I'd let it roll off and collected facts instead of fury. That made the victory sweeter. But I didn't pop champagne. There were decisions left to make that might define the next chapter of my life. Now that I had legal control, how would I use it? Shut the road? Charge for access? Sell it back at a markup just to watch the HOA swallow their pride? Those were all options. The smartest one would be the one with the least chance of blowing up in my face. So I sat down with my lawyer and made a plan that was precise and, importantly, defensible. Post clear signage about private property and controlled. Access. Firm but not hostile. Draft a usage agreement that allowed residents to continue using the road under specific conditions at my discretion. That agreement would be fair, reasonable hours, limits on commercial vehicles, and an annual nominal fee that legally acknowledged usage rights. Offer a grace period and an invitation for the HOA to negotiate. No drama, just a contractual option. If they sued, I'd have documentation showing I'd attempted to be reasonable. If I was going to assert control, I was going to do it like a lawyer, calmly, methodically, and with the paper trail to prove it. When I finally set up the first private property sign at the entrance, neighbors noticed immediately. A few came by to ask what was going on. Others called Karen with alarm. I told them the bare minimum. I purchased the connecting parcel. My attorney advised me to post notices. If you want more info, talk to the HOA or send me a message. The point was to stay above the fray. Let the law do the heavy lifting. I wasn't out to humiliate anyone. I was out to protect my right to decide what happened at my doorstep. And as the sun set that evening, casting long shadows over the newly stamped deed in my drawer, I felt the kind of exhausted satisfaction that follows a hard-won decision. The game had changed. They still had mouths and meetings and bitter gossip, but they no longer had the road on autopilot. If you suddenly discovered you legally controlled the only road your neighborhood relied on, what would you do? Be reasonable? Be ruthless or find some middle ground? Tell me what you'd choose. Because the next part is where I flip the switch and reveal how they reacted. You know that quiet thrill you get when you finally hold all the cards? That's exactly what I felt the day. I locked the gate, not out of stubbornness this time, but out of certainty. This wasn't petty anymore. This was legal, strategic, and 100% mine to decide. I'll never forget that morning. The HOA had sent yet another urgent compliance reminder the week before, still pretending they had authority. I laughed, slid the letter into my ever-growing binder, and went out to the gate with a brand-new industrial lock. The metal clicked shut with a sound that felt final, like slamming the door on months of harassment. But this time, I didn't just stop there. Right. Beside the gate, I bolted a fresh aluminum sign. Big, bold letters. Private road. Access by permission only. Cedar Lane Holdings, LLC. No shouting, no profanity, no threats. Just plain, boring, lawyer-approved words. But believe me, boring can be devastating when it's backed by paperwork. By the afternoon, the neighborhood grapevine was on fire. A couple of cars idled at the entrance. Drivers staring at the sign like it had appeared overnight. Which, technically, it had. People called each other. Text chains lit up, and before long, Karen herself marched down the road with 2 board members in tow. I watched from my porch as they tugged at the lock, rattled the gate, and snapped photos with their phones. They didn't even try to hide it. Karen spotted me standing there and shouted, "You can't do this! This road is for everyone." I raised my voice just enough to carry over the distance. "Check the records, Karen. It's not for everyone." "Not anymore." Her face turned the color of overripe tomatoes. She stormed off, but I could hear her voice carrying all the way down the street. "We'll take this to court. He's not going to get away with this." I just smiled. I didn't need to yell back. The deed was louder than anything I could say. The next 48 hours were chaos for the neighborhood. Some residents were furious, calling me selfish and vindictive. Others, though, quietly knocked on my door to ask what was really happening. When I showed them the paperwork, clean, stamped, undeniable, a few even admitted they respected me for standing my ground. The funniest part? Even the angriest neighbors still had to drive down my road. Some slowed down extra as if to make a point. Others refused to wave anymore, but every one of them passed under the sign that reminded them whose rules they were actually living under. The HOA scrambled. First came a barrage of emails claiming I was holding residents hostage. Then they threatened emergency legal measures. My lawyer replied with a calm 3-sentence letter, attaching the deeds and politely reminding them that trespassing without permission would not be tolerated. Silence followed. For the first time in months, my evenings were peaceful. No more flyers shoved under my door. No more creepy surveillance. No more board members loitering near my fence line. The harassment had evaporated, replaced by grudging silence. And the best part? The gate stayed locked. Day after day, week after week. Every time I heard that solid click of the lock sliding shut, it felt like justice. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my sanity. About drawing a line the HOA couldn't cross. no matter how many meetings they held or how many empty threats they lobbed my way. Of course, not everyone let it go quietly. One night, I caught a neighbor trying to slip around the side of the gate on "I just need to get through," he muttered. I shrugged, then asked permission. "It's not complicated." He grumbled but turned back. That was the moment it sank in for me. They hated the gate. They hated me, but they hated something else even more. The fact that I had flipped the power dynamic. They weren't used to hearing no. Looking back, I probably could have chosen a softer path. I could have negotiated, unlocked the gate part-time, or tried to smooth things over. But after the months of fines, flyers, glue, and gossip, no, they didn't earn compromise. They earned consequences. And for once, the consequences weren't mine to swallow. Be honest, if you were in my shoes, would you have kept that gate locked forever? Or offered the HOA a deal just to end the feud? Drop your answer below, because in the next part, I'll show you how the fallout exploded. Lawsuits threatened, neighbors divided, and the HOA scrambling to save face. If locking that gate felt like victory, what came after felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Calm at first, then roaring chaos all around me. The HOA didn't just accept defeat. Oh no, they doubled down. 3 days after the new lock went up, I got a thick envelope in the mail, certified and stamped like it was something official. I opened it at my kitchen table, coffee steaming beside me, and sure enough, the HOA had retained counsel. The letter was full of legal jargon, but the gist was simple. They claimed my locked gate violated easement rights and restricted necessary access. They gave me 14 days to comply or face a lawsuit. My lawyer laughed when I sent him a photo. "This isn't a lawsuit," he said. "This is a scare tactic. They're hoping you fold." He drafted a reply that was as calm as it was devastating. Attached my deed. Attached the new parcel purchase under my LLC. Cited the absence of any recorded easements. Ended with a single line. "Any further harassment will be considered trespassing and subject to damages." It was like throwing a bucket of cold water on their bonfire. That's when the real drama began. Half the neighborhood turned icy. People who used to wave as they jogged by now stared straight ahead, faces stiff with disapproval. Some slowed their cars at the gate just long enough to glare. One woman yelled out of her car window, "You're tearing this community apart!" I wanted to shout back, "Your precious HOA did that, not me." But I didn't. I just lifted my coffee mug in a silent toast and let the lock speak for itself. But here's the twist. The other half of the neighborhood secretly admired what I'd done. One guy, a quiet dad who mostly kept to himself, knocked on my door one evening. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice like we were conspiring. "I don't agree with everything, but respect. They've been bullying people for years. You're the first one to actually beat them." That conversation spread. A few more neighbors quietly admitted they were sick of the HOA's nonsense. Some even hinted they might back me if things went to court. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't the voice of the community anymore. They were just another faction, and a bitter one at that. And then there was Karen. Oh, Karen. She called me one Saturday morning, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't understand the damage you're causing," she snapped. "You're endangering property values. Do you want this neighborhood to fall apart?" I let her rant for 2 minutes straight before I calmly said, "Karen, the only thing falling apart is your illusion of control." Click. She hung up on me. That afternoon, I caught her pacing near the gate, phone in hand, gesturing wildly as she talked to someone. A few neighbors stood nearby watching the show. The HOA queen bee was finally looking desperate, and honestly, I enjoyed every second. Word spread fast that the HOA was taking me to court, but weeks went by, and no lawsuit came. My lawyer explained why. Filing a lawsuit costs money. Money they'd have to raise from residents. And not everyone was thrilled about funding Karen's crusade. At one board meeting, apparently, residents argued so fiercely that people stormed out. One man even shouted, "We're not paying thousands just because you don't like his gate." The HOA's unity cracked like glass under pressure. Life became a strange mix of peace and pettiness. On one hand, I slept better at night knowing they couldn't bully me anymore. No more glue on my locks, no more shady surveillance, no more bogus fines, just silence. On the other hand, the social fallout was real. Neighborhood barbecues? I wasn't invited. Group texts? I was left out. Even Halloween trick-or-treaters skipped my house, their parents pulling them along with whispers. Did it sting? Sure, but peace costs something, and I decided I'd rather be the guy behind the locked gate than the guy on his knees to the HOA. One evening, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching headlights roll slowly past the sign on the gate. Every single car had to pass under that bold statement. Private road, access by permission only. And it hit me. They hated me for the same reason they feared me. Because I'd shown them that power only works if people hand it over. I hadn't just locked a gate. I'd locked up their control. That realization tasted better than any beer. If your neighbors turned against you, but you had the upper hand legally, would you stick it out like I did, or would you sell the house and walk away clean? Drop your thoughts, because in the final part, I'll show you how this story ended, what I learned, and why I'll never look at a gate the same way again. When I look back on everything now, it almost feels surreal. What started as a simple locked gate spiraled into a neighborhood war, a legal chess match, and one of the most important lessons of my life. The gate is still there, still locked, still clicking shut every evening with that same satisfying finality. But the story isn't really about the gate anymore. It's about power, boundaries, and learning when to stop apologizing for wanting peace in your own home. After months of threats, whispers, and endless HOA drama, things eventually quieted down. No lawsuit ever came. The HOA backed off, partly because they knew the law wasn't on their side, and partly because their own residents stopped footing the bill for their crusade. Karen? She stepped down as HOA president not long after. Officially, she claimed she was prioritizing family. But everyone knew the truth. She lost the one battle she thought she could never lose, and once people saw her as beatable, her aura of control evaporated. The neighborhood split mended itself in small ways. Some folks never warmed up to me again, sure. They still give me cold stares when they drive by, pretending I don't exist. But others have come around. A few even knocked on my door one day to say they respected me for standing up, even if they wouldn't admit it in public. Funny how that works. People may not like a fight, but deep down, they admire the person who refuses to be walked on. Here's the truth. HOAs survive on fear and compliance. They count on people folding rather than fighting. Most homeowners don't have the energy, the time, or the money to push back, so the rules become gospel. But when you peel back the curtain, a lot of that power is just smoke. The only reason they had any hold on me was because I believed they did. The second I dug into the facts, into the paperwork, into the boring but powerful reality of property law, I realized something. They weren't stronger than me. They were just louder. And once I stopped letting their noise dictate my choices, I took my life back. That gate used to just be metal and hinges. Now it's something else entirely. It's a reminder. Every time I hear it lock, I remember that my peace is worth protecting, that my boundaries matter, and that sometimes the only way to keep your sanity is to stop asking for permission. I don't think of it as revenge anymore. At the time, yeah, it felt sweet to watch Karen fume and the HOA scramble. But now it feels bigger than that. It feels like reclaiming control in a world where too many people want to dictate how you live. And you know what? That's priceless. People ask me sometimes, friends, family, if it was worth it. The stress, the cost, the social fallout. Would I do it again if I had the choice? The answer is simple. Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, I can sit on my porch, breathe easy, and know that no HOA, no neighbor, no Karen has the power to take away what I worked for. My property, my rules, my peace. That's worth more than being invited to a few block parties. So if you're listening to this story and you've ever felt cornered by people who think they get to run your life, remember this. You don't always have to fight loud. You don't always have to fight dirty. Sometimes the smartest fight is the quiet one, fought with patience, paperwork, and persistence. And when the time comes to draw that line in the sand, don't be afraid to lock your gate. What about you? If you were in my position, would you have gone through all that trouble to protect your peace, or would you have given in just to keep the neighborhood happy? Share your thoughts. Because I want to know, are you a gate locker or a gate opener?